Hi there, and thank you for taking time to listen to today's presentation. I'm Al Kingsley, and I wanted to talk to you about the thought process and the considerations for shaping your school or trust digital strategy, and why it's now more relevant than ever when we consider the implications of COVID, our blended learning, and other pressures in terms of the use of technology as part of our curriculum. So let's start on our journey. And the most important start question is looking at what is possible alongside what we actually need. We want a school for the digital world. And you'll see a few musical themes as we progress through the presentation today. But the key message is you're on a journey, be positive, and don't stop believing. So if we take that first message, the first question that comes from that is really, what does everybody think when I refer to the word digital strategy? What does it mean to you? Well, I've presented and shared different views and guidance at many different schools and trusts. And one of the kind of key things we try and do is capture those initial impressions. So here's a few of the thoughts and keywords that have been raised by others who have been embarking on their digital journey. And so I suppose it starts with those real positives. It's innovating, it's exciting. It's an opportunity to bring some of those ideas about technology forward on the agenda. But alongside that, rightly, with all the other pressures that currently sit on the shoulders of educators, it's also daunting and potentially confusing. Where do we start? What do we need to include? And much more. So I'm hoping over the next 20 minutes, we can kind of answer some of those questions and give you some questions to go away and consider for yourselves. So let's move on from there and actually start with some kind of key points. So the starting point really is that sometimes you have to look back in order to move forward. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, schools ready for a digital world play, I think, on one of the key strengths of educators, being reflective. What's worked well so far? Have we reviewed what technology is currently embedded within our systems and been sustained? Not the solutions we tried for a term and then they drifted away, but the things that really have had an impact and we've got a good grip over. Do we know where our collective skills lie? Have we undertaken surveys of our staff's digital skills? Do we know what is relevant to help support the school development plan? Have we set our priorities and aligned them against the areas we want to develop most? So absolutely, we need to start with knowing what's worked best already and then look to build on that. Now, get a grip. The key message really for me on this is before we start looking on that journey forwards, we need to know some key things. What technology have we got? What IT devices? Where are they? Are they being effectively used and deployed in the right places? What software and apps do we use and what do we subscribe to? Have we reviewed whether some of those subscriptions are no longer relevant? And if so, we can free up some early cash as part of our digital journey. What about our infrastructure? Is it fit for a wireless environment to add more devices? Do we have cloud-based storage that ensures that we've got that accessibility outside of the physical schools space? So again, really focusing on that, let's not build on sandy land. So ironically, the more we know about what hasn't worked before, the better place we are to move forward and actually build on that. Next up, it's all about collaboration when we start our digital strategy. And perhaps not surprisingly, at the heart is our teachers and our students. And I'm really conscious that as I present some of these bits, I might be a bit large on the screen, so I might have to just bring myself down for some of these conversation points, carry on talking, and we'll expand again where appropriate. So we start with that conversation about what's relevant and important for our teachers and students, what really is effective. And then alongside that, we need to bring in those stakeholders. Well, not surprisingly, senior leadership and the school development plan will help shape some of the priorities that we have within our digital strategy. Alongside that, we need to make sure that the network manager and IT admin are part of the conversation, so they know what's expected, the things we're thinking of, and they're forewarned in terms of flagging any issues that might present from a technology and infrastructure perspective, but also that they're part of that debate, so they can support the tools that you ultimately choose to use and deploy across the school. Then we also need to be mindful of data privacy. Lots of schools, when we think back to March of 2020 in April, were looking quickly for online solutions to deliver learning for their students. And with that rush to look for online tools, there's also that challenge in terms of data protection impact assessments, what data are we sharing? So making sure the things we consider, we've also got an eye to that protection. We also want to make sure that the solutions we build are inclusive and accessible for all. So we want to make sure that the needs of our SEND children are factored in as part of that digital strategy. Then, of course, we've got right behind my head, but I'll read it out for you anyway. we've got our DSL and safeguarding. And that safeguarding, of course, is key. The more we give children access to technology and an online experience, the more we also need to be mindful of our obligations, whether it's under Kingsley and Prevent or just the broader digital citizenship for our students. And then, of course, we've got this really big one that sits at the top there, training and CPD. One of the things that's often missed most. No matter what we plan to do in terms of the technology, whether it's physical or whether it's software and apps, the measure of success will be the level of investment there's been to give teachers and support staff the right training and CPD so that they can leverage the most out of those tools and have the best chance of success. Success, of course, being impact on outcomes. And we'll talk about outcomes because it's not just curriculum, although that's the key. We're also interested in whether it saves time, delivers efficiencies, as well as improves teaching and learning. And then we've got finance. And finance sits there as quite a big bubble, and it's a really important one. But I put it there because it's not the first decision point. It's not how much have we got to spend, so what shall we do? It's what do we want to do over the course of our digital strategy? And then the finance, if you like, will dictate the pace, how quickly we can get to the end point. And it's really important to make sure that that mindset is flipped that way around. And then last but not least, we've got trustees and governors, that extra oversight and challenge, looping in potentially over a period of time. A digital strategy can have a significant cost, whether it's time investment or financial. And it's important that we have everybody on board with that journey, understanding what we're trying to achieve. Lots of things probably considered at that point. So we come to that kind of challenge then, which is how do we build based on priorities over conveniences? And of course, a digital strategy needs to start by being pedagogy focused, aligned with the school development plan. It needs to be realistic in terms of the capacity within your school of trust. You need to think about the things that are sustainable, the things that are actually going to be embedded and things that will transfer through no matter what the setting and scenarios for your school. And then the hardest one is thinking about impact. How are we going to measure impact? Think of it as stepping stones as we work through our digital strategy. How can we evidence that the first things we've done actually have had impact? And in doing so, build confidence for us all that we want to move to step 2, step 3, and so on, and so on. Of course, one of the big ones, I've already touched on it, is about that CPD. It's about confidence. It's really about building that staff confidence. So great CPD is a key part of a digital strategy, and it has a financial cost. Whether it's time or training, you still need to make sure it's a really key part of it. And alongside that, you need to build flag bearers, as I refer to, within your team, so that for different apps, you've got different go-to staff who are the people that are the innovators, have the most confidence in that product, so that you can spread the knowledge and mitigate the risk of one really knowledgeable person leaving the school or trust and leaving you with a real vacuum. And I think we can kind of tie that into the kind of lovely pictorial diagrams that Sylvia Duckworth and others do, which is about thinking about those 4 stages of teacher confidence when we use technology. Lots of staff a year ago were in survival mode, being pushed into using new tools they weren't familiar or confident with, and looking about, how do I use this? Do I have concerns I'm going to break it? If I start using it, will it work? And of course, we want to build that confidence to having mastery over key applications and tools that we choose. That mastery in itself will elevate to teachers and students using the technology more effectively to make impact, and ultimately what we all strive for. Using tools, being creative in the way that we layer and utilize them so that we start to build innovation within the school as well. I always say that communication is at the heart of most projects, whether we're thinking the education space or the commercial world. And in many regards, I think schools have done really, really well over the last year in recognizing the need to have greater pathways of communication. And we think about quotes. There's a quote there from John Hattie, if you want to increase student academic achievement, give each student a friend. But the reality is comms and that association with peers is key at all strands. So under communication, it's about building those communication layers between leadership and staff to staff, those peer channels, both from a well-being as well as a sharing resources and capacity, developing the school to student comms. Many will have said, well, we're going to be using, whether it's Microsoft Teams or whether it's Google or whether it's Zoom, we're going to use a platform for that comms with our students, but developing that consistently and interwoven into the fabric alongside the school to parent communication and broader community engagement, and recognizing that that same comms has huge well-being benefits, particularly for our more vulnerable learners, our SEND. So building those delivery platforms and again, embedding confidence and a core base of skills across everybody, and with a comms package, like the field of dreams, build it and they will come. People will embrace that. And I think schools have already made really good inroads in terms of that journey. Something I like to share, and people will say, hang on a second, Al, you're a kind of an EdTech advocate in every sense of the word. EdTech is not the solution. Now, if I just stop at that point, you'd be right to challenge me and say, what do you mean, Al? The key is it's not the solution. It supports the key strands. It underpins effective teaching and learning, or it can. It can underpin effective communication. It can underpin technology efficiencies and potentially cost savings. So it's absolutely a facilitator, not the be all and end all. But used the right way, EdTech as part of your digital strategy can really help support those key strands, the teaching, pedagogy, communication, well-being, and parental engagement, all those kind of hotspots. So a vision for a school for the digital world. We could list lots of things here. We could kind of say, well, it's pedagogy focused. EdTech is not the daily discussion, but an integral part of the school day. EdTech is used where appropriate, but it's not forced into each and every setting. Teachers have confidence to use new tools. Teachers have the confidence to try new things. Middle leaders are empowered to innovate with technology. The IT team are at the heart of digital discussions, not simply informed of the outcomes. Students are taught and encouraged to be confident digital citizens. Appropriate safeguarding is at the heart of decisions we take. And alongside that, again, thinking over recent months, that part of our strategy is to mitigate that digital divide. We also want to make sure that we've got confidence to make the right choices, not always to say that EdTech is the solution to everything. Sometimes a quick quiz of mini whiteboards use, effective questioning, pose, pause, pounce, bounce, those kind of things are far more appropriate. But alongside that, when we're looking at new solutions and how we can impact in terms of our outcomes, being supported to take risks where appropriate, trying new things and seeing the impact that has. Most importantly of all, whilst the narrative nationally has to be about here's some recommendations and exemplars, recognizing that one size doesn't fit all. Different devices and different softwares are relevant to different subjects, different student cohorts, and different teachers. And we need to recognize that and build that flexibility into part of the process. So a nice Bananarama quote on our musical journey. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And I'm stating the obvious there. It's a quote that Mark Anderson, a good friend of mine and colleague, uses on a regular basis. But it's really about not who can do the most, but how can you can use things effectively. And sometimes we can kind of align that with good, well-recognized frameworks. So for example, the SAMR model, where we kind of start and think, well, how do we move and utilize technology where it can implement change? And if we think of the SAMR model, we kind of start off with that substitution mode. We're kind of switching one tool from another. We've gone from pen and paper to writing it in a Word doc or a Google Sheet. And all we've done is we've done that simple substitution between the two processes. But then we kind of move to the augmentation, where actually by doing something digitally rather than pen and paper, I can also make links and jumps to supporting resources from within my documents, or I can embed pictures and video, and I can extend it further. And then as the SAMR model evolves, we kind of move on to the idea of that modification, where we start to use tools in a way that are a complete redesign, whether it's the way that we communicate online, the way that we interact, whether it's audio notes, all sorts of things that we can do. And ultimately, we move on to that redefinition. And I think it's really keen that when we talk about the SAMR model, this isn't a model that says your success is measured by how far along that process you get. At all levels, it's appropriate and relevant. It's just understanding that tech is there to provide different options, but hopefully to add value and to give the opportunity to redefine the way that some teaching tasks and learning can be delivered. So let's move on our fast-paced journey from the SAMR model. And I'm conscious my head might be in the way again, but we'll talk about the blended world. This is something that's really fed back and resonated for all of us over the last 12 months. And it really starts with that kind of debate and discussion about asynchronous versus synchronous. And many of you will be familiar with that model, which is the asynchronous, the sharing of resources, how we deliver things, video exemplars and so on, versus the discussion from a synchronous perspective, that sense of being, in the person, live with our learners in online classes, again, whether it's Teams or Meet or other solutions, and how we can kind of blend that delivery. And the truth is, the discussion and debate, there have been hundreds, and many have shared their views. But the outcome for most schools, without a doubt, has been about looking for a blended model. That context that we simply can't deliver everything, nor is it appropriate for all our learners to be front of screen for 5-6 hours. finding that balance, chunking up work, delivering some work live to our learners, and having the platforms and tools to deliver exemplars and resources, track the work they're doing, and also to close that feedback loop. Have effective tools to make sure we can capture what the students have done and provide timely feedback to help them develop what they're doing. One of the biggest mantras of all, and I appreciate we're going at quite a fast pace for this presentation today, is really about less is more. It's far more, I suppose, beneficial is probably the most important term maybe we can think of. It's certainly more beneficial for a school to look at a few solutions that are well embedded and if being used effectively than try and have a race to who can introduce the most new things. It creates a challenge in terms of well-being, time pressures, skill set and confidence, and actually it's far better to do a few things well. Let's move on. There's lots of tips that get shared from feedback when it comes to students working online. I'm not going to go through all of them, but tools like using chat, leaving time between lessons, not trying to do too much, chunking things up, using the 2020 rule, keeping things simple, being accessible, all the kind of things that we've collectively have assimilated from the experiences over the last 9 to 12 months. So if we think about all the things we'd like to achieve and all the potential challenges and how COVID is shaped in terms of that discussion about blended learning rather than just being in the present in the classroom, I think often what happens is schools can break down the digital strategy into some key strands. And certainly within my trusts, we've kind of focused on 6 key pillars, which I'd like to share. So the first is about innovating learning, and I'm conscious my head's in the way, but I will share the notes for these slides. The second, following on from that, is about developing students' digital skills. The third pillar is about enhancing and supporting teachers' skills. The fourth, not surprisingly, is about that review of technology and infrastructure. The fifth is about building those effective communications as part of our strategy. And then the final strand, hopefully not a surprise to anybody, is about developing everybody's well-being. And at a very quick pace, if we just rush through some of these kind of key ones here, in terms of the ICT and developing skills, it's about making sure we've got access to classes. We've reviewed the effective use of classes. We've looked at supporting apps to support all of our learners, including things like Send and immersive readers. We've got the right tools and skill set embedded for streaming synchronously versus asynchronously. We've got the right tools for the right cohort at the right age. And we've got that kind of focus in terms of how we're going to innovate learning with different uses of technology. And then quickly we think about student digital skills, making sure we've undertaken skills surveys. We're developing student skills and confidence with the core apps. We're building CPD onto that. And we're also making sure digital citizenship is a key part of our digital skills for students. Then from the teacher's perspective, again, make sure we've got that kind of surveys. So we're keeping that constant feedback from our staff, developing CPD, consolidating where appropriate, trust-wise foundation platforms. So we've got continuity and consistency, establishing online tech clubs, developing online resources to share, stream and other examples, making sure we've reviewed Classroom AV and have a strategy for access to technology for staff when they're working from home. In terms of the broader, looking at it from a technology infrastructure point of view, it's reviewing our online capacity and services, considering data protection, making sure we evaluate the flexibility of our primary assessment tools as well as our secondary assessment and retrieval tools, looking at new AI platforms we can do, considering our disaster recovery plan, and constantly doing a check and balance with our ongoing digital strategy alongside what's actually happening within the classroom and the school as a broader sense. Within our communication strand, of course, we want to develop our platform, whether it's Teams, Zoom, Meet, Hangout, Classroom Cloud, whatever it might be, establish staff-only Teams channels to support dialogue, promote parental engagement, develop the school-to-home comms strategy, how we message, how we deliver information to both our students and parents, and looking in the broader sense of having a focus on effective communication. And then the last strand, and absolutely not last but least, is focusing on how we foster staff communications, reviewing tools that can also benefit and reduce teacher workload, whether it's assessment tracking, rubrics, auto-grading, and so on. Reflect on the remote working versus the impact on well-being. How's that impacting in terms of staff time? And are there ways that we can mitigate some of that? Making sure we've got better Send well-being by using more face-to-face support and interaction that we can use with the tools that we've got. Making sure we've got easier access to online resources. Promoting positivity and success when we are in school, looking at digital signaging and messaging, and of course, fostering a well-being group. Again, a fast pace, but some of the kind of key headlines. And making sure alongside that, I alluded to it earlier, that we develop different champions within the school for different products, the different go-to pieces, spreading the load, spreading the experience, making it more accessible to support staff so that they're encouraged to take risks. Top tips: get everybody involved. Don't try and do too much too quickly. Plan for lots of CPD, build confidence, identify ways to measure your impact as you move along your journey. Communication is the key. Make sure it's part of that journey. And hopefully right on time, about 20 minutes. That's a real whistle-stop tour. If you'd like to find out more and get under the detail of a digital strategy, there's a bit.ly link that I'm sharing for you over there that will allow you to download a full 60-page digital strategy guide for free that will give you more tips and ideas. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all, and I hope you have a really successful event.